Welcome to episode 10 of the Gamers Tavern. Before I start talking about this week's episode, friend of the show, Brian Patterson, who you may know through his D20 Monkey webcomic, recently underwent surgery on his knee after an accident that did not involve arrows, for the record. I just wanted to let Brian know that the thoughts and prayers of the Gamers Tavern are with him, and we all wish him a speedy recovery. Tonight's episode is about the influence film has had on gaming and the influence gaming has had on film. So sit back, relax, grab a drink from the bar, and settle in. We'll be back to our regular table in the corner right after this word from our sponsor. Hello gamers, I'm Daryl Mott Jr. from Anacle News Tabletop and the Gamers Tavern Podcast, which you probably know because I'm betting I was just talking a second ago. I'm sure you already know about DriveThruRPG, as it is the biggest repository for digital copies of your favorite games. Dungeons & Dragons, Shadowrun, Battletech, World of Darkness, Numenera, Fate, and so many more. And sometimes there are pennies on the dollar because, face it, PDFs can sometimes be so much more convenient than print copies, but if you need print copies, they sell those too. So if you want to support the Gamers Tavern podcast, click on the affiliate links in the show notes and check out DriveThruRPG.
Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Gamers Tavern. I'm Ross Watson.
And I'm Daryl Mott Jr.
And tonight we have with us Mack Martin, and we're going to be talking tonight about gaming and film. How are you doing, Mack?
I'm doing pretty great. How are you today?
Doing fine. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your gaming character sheet, and don't forget to include the cat smuggling. Okay.
Well, as of today, I pulled up a caper to avoid a catastrophe.
Oh, very clever.
I had to smuggle my cats to the car while my landlord wasn't looking so he wouldn't see them. It was literally a moment out of a sitcom. It was hilarious.
So, Mr. John Smith, in case your landlord is listening.
If his landlord is listening,
if your landlord is listening, then your market penetration is much higher than I think any of us expected.
I would have to agree with that.
He's not a gamer, so that would be impressive.
But what would a gamer know you from?
Well, I got my start with Dark Heresy, as you know. Ross actually gave me the start in the industry. I worked with him over on the 40K roleplay, and after a few books, I took the wheel on Dark Heresy. Then I got to work with some really great guys and put out Dust Warfare. I got to be kind of the driving force on that one. And then most recently, I put out Malifaux 2nd Edition, and soon Through the Breach, the Malifaux RPG should be coming out.
Yeah, it's fair to say Mack and I have worked together for quite a while. I think every single thing he just mentioned, with the exception of Malifaux 2nd Edition, he and I worked together on it. So
yeah, in some capacity, yeah.
But it's great to have you on the show, Mack. Thanks for joining us tonight. And what is if people want to find you on the internet and see what you're working on these days, where do they go?
Well, I work for Weird now, so it's weird-games.net. But I'm also on Facebook under Mack Martin. You'll see my bearded face smiling next to my Grey Knights, so you should be able to spot me if you just wanted to search me.
But are you a neckbeard?
No, I actually shave the neck part.
Good man, good man.
Good man.
But I do glue it in between the eyebrows.
Oh.
Just to get that Cro-Magnon look. I'm telling you, it's coming back.
Paleo is back, baby. Okay.
Fashion is cyclical.
All the way back to caveman era. Okay. So tonight we're talking about gaming and film, and I think maybe we want to start with like inspiration and influences and whatnot, because obviously film came before what we typically consider role-playing games and gaming in general these days. But it's clear to me that there's
I would disagree with that.
Well,
all right.
As we know it today.
Why don't you elaborate on that?
Little Wars by Jules Verne predates the first motion picture.
Okay, so no. That's that's a totally valid point. So
sorry, I didn't mean to derail you. I'm a jerk.
From the modern interpretation of gaming and role playing games, I think film, is probably in general more of the influencer. But of late, I think we are seeing more and more films that are being impacted by gaming. Specifically, like the most recent one I can think of is one called Zero Charisma, and The Gamers, and things like that.
Gamers just came out with a third movie, and it is hilarious.
It is. It's great. It's
I loved it. I found myself desperately wanting to play that card game.
I have watched the trilogy of the Gamers film. I mean, we're like, we're skipping way down the bullet.
Sorry,
list, but that's fine.
I'm here to derail things.
The games, the movie specifically about games, which is like, the gamers are in that category. I love them. I love them to death. I have seen like a ton of them. I've seen Life with the Dice Bag. I've seen Thaco. I've seen all the Gamers trilogy. I've seen there's just a ton of titles, and they're all really, really interesting to watch. There's a documentary called The Dungeon Masters.
Patton Oswalt actually introduced me to that one. When I met him at a comedy club, he introduced me to that one. He described it to me. He spent like 10 minutes going on about it. And this was before it had come out. I was just doing the festival circuit at the time, and he just described this one scene to me. And when I'm watching the movie, all I can do is facepalm watching it, because it's about this group that had been playing Dungeons and Dragons in the same campaign with the same characters for years. And and then something happens, and they do something that the Dungeon Master doesn't like. So he just says, okay, well, give me your character sheets. That was a sphere of annihilation. You're all dead. And for 10 years, these people do not talk to each other at all. Their friendships dissolve. They've been gaming every single week for years, and then just don't talk to each other. And this documentary filmmaker found them all and brought them all together and filmed the most tense and joyless game of Dungeons and Dragons that has ever been played in the history of ever.
The reunion game was very awkward.
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
Well, one of the guys that was in the Dungeon Masters, a guy named Scott Coram, he was the really creative one who was kind of wanting to write his own novel and things like that. He's actually a guy I see at Gen Con an awful lot, because he's like actually working in the industry now. I think he's taken, some really big steps forward thanks to the Dungeon Masters documentary, which I think is at least, there's some positive news to come out of that film. But so let's get back around to this idea of influence. Mack, can you think of what's the first movie you think of that influenced you as a gamer, like in the things that you do as a...
Ooh, I would have to say Robot Jocks.
Oh, good choice.
As a
kid,
what
did I say it was on my list?
Oh my god, I remember that film. I've actually watched a review of it not that long ago.
Mac, I have to ask, BattleTech player?
I had never heard of it, but I saw Robot Jocks as a kid. Then, 3 years later, I saw BattleTech in the store. And so and it was just that thin rule book. It wasn't the full one. It didn't have any, barely had any of the history. But it was in, a Borders or a Barnes & Noble, where they had they had the text sheets, half-size books that, to me, were the same size as the Garfield books I read at the library. And I saw that BattleTech on there, and I'm like, yes, that is... I want this. And I asked my parents to buy it for me. And it was a book, so they didn't even think anything of it. They'd be like, yeah, sure. It's $20 or something. They bought it. And I remember what struck me is I'd just seen Robot Jocks, and I'd grown up racing home in the 4th grade. So this is after that. I was 12 or 13. We saw Robot Jocks. But I raced home when I was in the 4th grade, 3rd and 4th grade, something like that, to see the Power Hour on TV. Now or Power 2 Hour, something like that. It was cartoons, which was, He-Man, G.I. Joe, Thundercats, and Robotech.
Yeah.
So here for the very first time, I had just seen Robot Jocks. I've got this BattleTech book. I'm flipping through it, and I get to the Veritechs, which were obviously in no way stolen, right? The VTOL.
The land air
Lambs, that's it. Lambs, yes.
They had a legal license for them, but they didn't get the license from the American licensor. They got a license from Bandai. They didn't get it from Harmony Gold, and that was a decade worth of court cases.
Let's just say it's a very complicated case of how that came about, because it is extremely complicated.
But actually, it's what's so funny about that is my cousin Austin and I, the rules were so dense at the time that I wasn't actually able to play that game for, I want to say, another 2 years. It just sat on a shelf, and I wasn't able to play it because we didn't have any miniatures. I didn't know how to play it. we couldn't really get through the rules because my cousin Austin didn't want to read them, and then he just wouldn't trust me, and it was a whole thing. We actually ended up started playing BattleTech with our Legos, and then we threw out the rules and just built our own rule set. So the very first role-playing game I ever played, or miniatures game I ever played, was one designed thanks to Robot Jocks, based on the pictures we had in BattleTech and some of the loosest information, like, well, this is going to be our stats for a Gauss weapon.
Nice.
And played with Legos.
Robot Jocks was also, very important to me, too. I'm going to go there. And I'm going to say this. I love BattleTech. I'm a big fan of BattleTech. But you know what it still does not have?
A butt in the shower scene?
Rocket fists. You can't fire your fist off at somebody and smack them.
After all these years, you'd think it'd show up in one of the tech
Well, you remember Robot Jocks is an awesome scene where that guy does that. He fires his fist off as a rocket. It's like crazy anime fun, but, it's one of the best scenes from Robot Jocks is that.
I bet you if I dug through one of the newer Solaris source books, it'd be in there.
It might, but it's never been... Let's just put it this way. It's never been something I think that most gamers are even aware of as an option.
I think the problem you guys are hitting is it's not an option. All of the mechs do it. You just have to declare it. It's like a walk action.
Well, I want to be, let me say something else too. BattleTech just recently came out with a new way to play the game, basically. It's called Alpha Strike. And it is a thing of beauty in how elegant and quick and easy it is to learn. And just, it really changed my whole perspective on BattleTech. It fixed about 85% of my issues with the game, which is pretty old. The standard game is kind of, getting a little creaky in the joints, but Alpha Strike,
from first to fourth edition, they didn't update very much at all.
Alpha Strike is like, I would say, if you're a fan of BattleTech, you haven't looked at it in a long time, definitely go check out Alpha Strike to see what you think. But thank you for that answer. That was a very, very good answer. Daryl, what was the first film that really influenced you as a gamer?
Here's the thing. I don't really have one in terms of that influenced me in games, per se, because I started really getting into film and really getting into gaming around the same time and independently. Because, excuse me, when I was starting to get into gaming, that's when there was kind of this lull in terms of movies that were coming out that were kind of cool and gamery-esque, like the early 90s. There wasn't really much going on then. I mean, now, this was also the time when the BattleTech cartoon series was coming on Saturday mornings at like 6:30 in the morning.
Oh my god.
For a good reason, because that show sucked.
No, oh, come on, wait. This is going to become like the BattleTech episode, even though it wasn't meant to be. But the BattleTech cartoon had some beautiful things in it. And I loved
it. Tried.
Well, okay, let me take you back to the opening, right? You got this, the clans are invading the entire inner sphere, like all of the known worlds in the galaxy are under a threat, right? And the main character for the BattleTech cartoon is like, yeah, but then they invaded my home planet. He was like the Chuck Norris of early Saturday morning cartoons.
And that may also been what put me off on it, was that I was always a Jade Falcon fan, and they were the bad guys.
They were, and they were cartoon bad guys too. They were very, Cobra Commander. But
my problem with that show was,
what's that?
It aired opposite of Gummy Bears.
Oh,
where I was, and let me tell you, after one episode of BattleTech, that was I chose Gummy Bears as a kid.
Bouncing here and there and everywhere.
Bouncing here and there and everywhere.
Gummy Bears is a high quality cartoon. I think there are things in the BattleTech cartoon that were really fun and really neat, but overall, I think it's fair to say that there were a lot of better shows on. Let's just put it that way.
Well, I just tried rewatching it recently, and it has not aged well at all. But I did. Now that I was sitting there thinking about what we were talking, I'm like, wait a minute. No, there were probably 2 or 3, maybe 4 movies that I watched that really influenced me. But it wasn't in terms of that. You guys were talking about BattleTech, and the first thing that popped in my mind were movies that I saw long after I got into gaming. I didn't watch Conan or any of those movies until I was already. Actually, I watched Conan for the first time like 2 years ago. So I didn't see any of those that typically that's what kind of got them interested in that sort of sword and sorcery fantasy.
We're talking about the 1983 Conan, is what you saw a couple of years ago.
So
yes, the Conan movie. Not as far as I know, there's only been 2 of them.
So not the good one.
Cram! I have never prayed to you. I have no tongue for it. That version.
How exactly do you become an awesome pit fighter by pushing a wheel in a circle for 2 decades?
Because he's Arnold.
Isn't that how Hector Ortiz did it?
All right. Well,
but anyway, I did think of 2 movies, 2, 3, 4 movies from the late 80s, early 90s that did really influence me, but it influenced me in a different game. I'm going to throw out 2 immediately and 2 that I didn't watch until a little bit later. But the first movie I ever saw in the movie theaters was Fright Night.
Oh, good
which is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it is also one of the first movies that took the vampire mythology and put it in a modern day setting without, Dracula in the cape and Ivan tu your blood. No, Jerry Dandridge was a pretty normal-ish guy, except for the fact he was a bloodthirsty vampire.
This is the one with, this is the original, the one with Roddy McDowall in it.
There was not a sequel, even though David Tennant was awesome in the sequel, but...
Well, there was a remake, as far as I'm aware of it.
The remake. Yeah, the remake was... There was a sequel, too, that very few people know about, but... Yeah. But one of the other movies that came out around the same time was The Hunger, which was another very modern take on vampires, and I watched that at a very young age.
David Bowie, right?
I probably should not have watched that at a very young age, but... And then, right around that same time, 2 more movies came out, right as I was really getting to gaming, and probably pushed me off the deep end into White Wolf, which were Interview with the Vampire and The Crow.
Yeah, you know what? I was going to mention The Crow and how that pushed me into White Wolf as well.
The Crow is a beautiful film. I mean, it's funny because I keep looking at that film and I keep watching it, I keep enjoying the hell out of it, but I keep thinking in the back of my head, would it have resonated as strongly if it wasn't, inextricably tied in with the horrible tragedy of its main star's death? And I
can tell you, I've read the actual original shooting script of The Crow, and it's a horrible, horrible thing to say because it's an absolute tragedy what happened. It was a stupid mistake by people who were overworked and tired and weren't thinking properly. I can go into detail about exactly what happened, exactly what caused it, and the court documents and blah, blah. But I've read the original shooting script, and the finished product is a much stronger film because they had to shoot around Brandon Lee so much.
And what's funny?
There was a lot in that that was cut, like the Skull Cowboy.
Well, the thing is like
that would not have worked.
I think if it I agree with you that it was a horrible tragedy, and I wish it if I could change things, I would make it to where that didn't happen. But appreciating what we have, I have to say, I think if it wasn't for that tragedy, The Crow would be remembered mostly as a fairly average action film instead of with
a fucking awesome soundtrack.
Well, okay, maybe, but it became. I think the way it is now is it's become sort of a genre-defining. It is a real classic. It's a classic film.
Aesthetic-defining. That whole sort of shooting like it's black and white but still being in color, gothy sort of thing, where The Matrix took most of its style pretty much from Proyas, both in that and in Dark City.
Let me hop in there for you, Ross. I saw The Crow in theaters. My friend Jimmy Lujan and I went and saw it. And he got us in because he was old enough to get tickets, and then we both went and saw it. And I did not know that Brandon Lee had died, but I had read the comics. I thoroughly enjoyed the film. It was one of my favorite, out there. It's still to this day. If I was trapped on a desert island, I've been asked that question, what one movie would you watch every day? I consistently answer The Crow. It actually is, that dark pleasure, that favorite movie for me. But I didn't know Brandon Lee had died when I saw it, and I didn't know for about a year and a half after, until finally I remarked to one of my friends, man, when are they going to come out with another Crow movie? And he was like, well, never. The main character died. And I literally went, wait, what? And... I didn't know that he died during the shooting. I was, 15? I didn't know. I was an idiot. But, yeah, it had that resonance for me. So maybe it would have gone down, at least in its form, if, assuming the audiences didn't know that Brandon Lee had passed.
Guess it's not a good day to be a bad guy, huh, Skag?
Skank.
Yeah, sorry. It's a fantastic film. Love it.
I still say
I
still say to Devil's Night, my new favorite holiday, is a joke when we do toasts.
Wow.
No one ever gets it.
Wow. Well, I'm gonna throw mine out there. The one film I saw when I was a kid.
I had one more thing to say.
Oh, go ahead.
Hold on. I just had one more thing to say about The Crow. Talk about what might have been. Do you know what Brandon Lee's next role was supposed to be after The Crow? He'd already signed the contracts.
What was it?
Oh, you're gonna make me upset. Tell me.
Johnny Cage in Mortal Kombat.
Huh.
Oh, that would have made that movie
think
so
about
much
how
better.
that movie would. Think about how much better that movie would have been if it had an actual charismatic actor in any of the roles in that movie.
Oh, it would have been so much better.
Wait, are you saying that? Are you saying the Highlander is not a charismatic guy?
Are you saying
Not in
that
that
Claymation Goro was not a charismatic guy?
Claymation Goro was the most charismatic actor in that movie.
I consider the first Mortal Kombat to be a guilty pleasure, and I really enjoy it. So there's that.
It's a fun movie. It's a fun movie. Don't get me
It's
wrong. But
the theme songs with the soundtrack with KMFDM though. You can't go wrong.
The soundtrack is
Another-
the best part.
Yeah.
So all right, going back to like the films that influenced us in gaming, I think for me, there's only one choice, and that would be
Jumanji?
Krull.
Oh.
Krull was the first movie when I saw it, and I started gaming at a very young age. My dad had introduced me to the Thomas Covenant novels when I was like 6, and I saw Krull when I was 8. And my dad had just got me the red box of Dungeons & Dragons, and I was just watching Krull, and I'm thinking in my head, this is what a fantasy adventure is like. Now, granted, I think Krull's ending is really, really, really bad, but most of the film, still in my mind, is like an epic journey. It's an epic quest. It's the hero, and he's learning, and he runs into his unlikely allies, and you can almost pay like some of the classes these guys. Like, well, that dude's a wizard, that dude's a thief, And I just the monsters, especially the Slayers. I probably ran maybe 20 different campaigns when I was in grade school and junior high, featuring the Slayers as bad guys because I thought they were awesome. So Krull, Krull was definitely the film that is, especially like its visuals. The story not so much, but the visuals and the overall tone and feel they were trying to go for, I think, is what I was trying to reach for when I was starting my journey as a gamer.
Yeah, there was a whole genre of movies that came out right about the same time that influenced a lot of people and probably a lot of game writers as well during that era, like Krull, Conan, Beastmaster.
Okay, so we're talking about the sword and sandals era of the 80s. Absolutely. Yeah, there was a whole bunch of fantasy novels.
Willow was that one for me.
Fantasy movies in that time period. Well, Willow's a little bit later in that period.
And it's also supposed to be an epic fantasy. It was George Lucas and Steven Spielberg couldn't get the rights to The Hobbit, so they made Willow instead.
Well, I think the quintessential ones you nailed already, like Conan and Beastmaster. Those are very obviously those fantasy films that I think they modeled the Ranger off of the Beastmaster pretty close. Hawk the Slayer is a fantastic film from that era for gaming because it hits a lot of those notes as far as these guys are different classes and whatnot. And
when I was a kid,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. When I was a kid, I saw Lady Hawk, I think is what it is.
Oh, Lady Hawk,
the one where the guys,
yep.
The guy's a wolf during the day, she's a hawk at night, or vice versa.
Yep, double crossbow, and it has the weirdest synthesizer soundtrack, but it's actually a good film.
When I was a kid, I saw that, or not a kid, I saw it when I was like 22, and my only thought was, wow, this is the worst pair of Lone Wolf campaigns I've ever seen.
Well, yeah, Excalibur was also kind of in that time frame. Labyrinth.
If you want to talk about movies that were bringing in gamers, were Labyrinth and one that just popped in my head, The Dark Crystal.
Oh yes, The Dark Crystal, the Gartham are one of the the Gartham. Those are the big crab dudes. Those are really scary monsters, man.
You can fly? I can't fly. Of course not. You're a boy.
Yeah. The Dark Crystal is another really good example. I've actually used Ogra's Orrery as a setting for Accursed not so long ago.
You know that orrery, or is that what it is? What is the thing with all the moving?
Yeah, I like to say it's an orrery.
Yeah, I can never say it right. That, to me, that scene in that room with the, the spinning planets and all that kind of stuff, that sums up to me what, every time I go through play True Dungeon, and I love True Dungeon, but every time I play through it, that's what I'm waiting for.
You want to see that?
I want to solve that.
Oh, that would be fun.
Right?
Yeah.
I can't imagine how much money that sort of thing would cost, and I don't expect it of them, but
how about,
man, wouldn't that be cool?
How about heavy metal? Heavy metal, I thought was... I remember we had lots of conversations in gaming about heavy metal.
I wasn't allowed to see it.
Oh.
The movie.
It's
and I haven't ever gone and seen it. So.
It's worth watching sometime, I would say.
It's gone from being epic cool to kind of cheesy cool, but it's still really, really cool.
The Lochnar.
Okay, I'll check it out.
That movie actually stands the test of time. The sequel,
Avoid
came
the
out.
sequel. Watch the original. It's definitely quite good.
Heavy Metal 2000 is not worth the time to watch the trailer, let alone the movie itself.
Well, there's no hate on this
Wow.
podcast. There are certain things we were disappointed with, but there's no hate.
But
You know,
the first one was a great, like, anthology style,
Agreed.
fantasy, sci-fi, epic.
John Candy is a voice in that film.
Nice.
Eugene Levy
Yeah.
and there's a ton of names you'd recognize. I can't even think of them all. And of course, you can't say anything about heavy metal without talking about the
soundtrack is a thing of beauty. Veteran of the Psychic Wars by Blue Oyster Cult is still just a fantastic song.
That is a book I want to read.
Yeah, I would read it. So yeah, there's the Sword and Sandal movies. There's a really super cheesy one called Sorceress from 1980, and if you ever just want to see something like it's just crazy cheesy from the 80s, look up the trailer on YouTube because it is the essence of that. There's the Sword and the Sorcerer as well. Am I missing it? I'm sure I'm missing a couple more. I just can't think of them off the top of my head.
I can always go with the Arthurians. Like, well, we mentioned Excalibur.
We did
also go back to the Disney movie Sword in the Stone.
Yes.
Yeah, well, the epic battle in Sword in the Stone between the two shapeshifters is probably one of the, I think from gaming perspective, that's probably the part that I always like the most.
Yeah, not to shift gears on you guys, but why does that make me think of Barbed Wire and Johnny Mnemonic?
Well,
And
those are
Tank Girl.
okay. Now, yeah, well, we're in a different era and we're talking about a different genre, but those are
Sorry,
definitely
Cyberpunk.
no. Those are it's fine.
It's
fine. That's definitely films that have influenced the genre for sure.
You want to talk probably, in my opinion, the three biggest ones that influenced the cyberpunk genre in terms of gaming were Blade Runner, Escape from New York, and RoboCop.
Oh, yeah.
Blade Runner is pretty much like in terms of visual style. I think Blade Runner is almost undeniably the father of cyberpunk.
You know what I've been watching, like, that's on the air right now that has made me want to play Shadowrun or Cyberpunk so hard has been that new Almost Human show.
The one with Carl Urban.
I haven't seen that yet.
Okay, I don't want to oversell it because it's only 3 episodes in.
Everyone's overselling it. Don't worry about it.
I don't know if I like it. I don't know if I like it more than Firefly because I haven't seen Firefly recently enough, and it's only had 3 episodes, so I can't make that claim. But I want to.
Okay, well that's a strong endorsement.
Everyone I know is talking about that show, and it's on my list to do. I've got a long holiday week right now. We're recording this the day before Thanksgiving, so I'm off for 4 days, so I'm planning on digging into that.
Well,
The first 3 episodes are on Hulu. Go.
So Mack, you had a really great point about shifting gears into cyberpunk, because I think we should talk about cyberpunk for a while. And Daryl brought up Blade Runner, Escape from New York, RoboCop. What about you? What are some things that you think of when you're thinking of cyberpunk? And you've already mentioned. I mean, if you want to talk about Barbed Wire and Johnny Mnemonic, you can go right ahead. So
For me, those 2 were the big ones because the characters were so flawed. One, acting was terrible.
Well, Johnny Mnemonic does have a dolphin.
Yeah. Well, what I really liked in
here's
Barbed
the thing
Wire
about,
was
here's
the
thing
character
about,
who's. Oh, sorry.
The thing about Johnny Mnemonic is, you know your movie's in trouble when Henry Rollins is the one who's acting the best.
I liked...
By the way, I cannot recommend enough. Go look up the original short story, Johnny Mnemonic. It is an amazing story, and the film it tried really, really hard, but it just didn't do it justice because of a lot of various things that were going on in the production.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a Philip K. Dick, correct?
No, that's
William Gibson.
William Gibson. Okay.
It's part of his trilogy because what's the
Neuromancer
and lady in that?
Mona Lisa Overdrive, I believe.
Yeah,
Molly Millions.
The Cyber
for me, it's just
Molly
was supposed to be
Millions.
Molly from not Blade Runner.
Neuromancer.
That's Philip K. Dick. Neuromancer. Thank you.
Sorry, Mac. You were
there goes
saying,
all your nerd cred.
Please proceed, Mr. Martin.
Oh no, I was just saying that those characters I loved because they were so flawed, like the wired reflexes that are going off the that are short circuiting, and one of the characters being Pamela Anderson.
Well,
Casablanca and Cyberpunk.
She does have some undeniably Filmable talents.
Only the two?
Well, here's the thing. I'm not sure which came first, but we already had that Cyberpunk rulebook that was nothing but Barbie dolls dressed up in Cyberpunk gear.
That came after.
Third
One
edition.
or the other.
That
we
one-
don't need both.
The dolls one was actually pretty recent. Although, in fairness, I want to say that I've been told that Pamela Anderson is nothing but a sweet human being, so I shouldn't be too mean to her.
Well, yeah, there is no hate on this podcast. You know, if address your emails to or ross@gamerstavern.org. But I think the thing for me, like Cyberpunk-wise, let's talk about The Matrix. I think that was a very strong Cyberpunk
That one
oriented
didn't
film.
influence Cyberpunk gaming nearly as much as it influenced Cyberpunk gamers. And there's
Fair enough.
another movie
That's a
that
fair
came
point.
out. There's another movie that came out probably about 3 or 4 years later called Equilibrium.
Oh, God.
Which was before Batman and before American Psycho. It was one of Christian Bale's big breakout movies.
Love
And
Equilibrium.
it is such a great movie, and it was
No.
just dumped on the market unceremoniously because the studio had already made the profit pre-selling the rights overseas, and they didn't want to do a big advertising campaign and possibly lose money on it if it flopped. But it's gotten a cult following since then. But both The Matrix and Equilibrium created, at least in every Shadowrun I've ever played, the invasion of the dark trench-coated gun-kata adepts.
Thank you. Right. I hate Equilibrium. I have nothing against Tate Diggs. I have nothing against Christian Bale. I hate the fact that I cannot run Shadowrun without someone going, can I play a gun adept?
I think you're crazy. I think that's awesome. I think Equilibrium.
I love gun adepts.
I think Equilibrium is a fantastic film, and I like Gun Adepts too. I have to say, as soon as I saw that movie, I'm like, I'm making that character.
For me,
That was the first thing. Yeah.
For me, it's a little bit like having to explain every time we go, let's play D&D, and then 3 of your players go, fantastic, I'm going to play a Dark Elf Ranger who uses scimitars. Can I have a pet panther?
Okay, I hear what you're saying. It's been overdone, and that's there's certain things that have hit, certain memes, let's say, that are prevalent in gaming culture that maybe have caused overexposure.
Oh,
And Drizzt Do'Urden is one of those, and I would agree with you definitely that Gun Kata, Gun Adepts in black trench coats is also one of those.
although to get
I
back
would
to your
agree.
positive spin, the scene where he goes into the room where she's like that memory room, I don't know what to call it, where in Equilibrium where that woman is storing all her memories and all like
yeah, the objects that cause emotions.
yeah, the feelings room, if you will.
Yeah.
The scene where he goes into that and has to control himself, having never controlled
And
his
he's- and he-
emotions before, was one of the most
And he
subtle and nuanced performances I've seen in a long time.
Because he takes off his glove and just slowly
Yeah.
caresses everything in that room while
Yeah.
keeping a completely straight face. And
Yeah. And you see him later on, walking up the stairs, and he's got his glove off, and he's now touching, other things. But yeah, there was a lot of really great performances in that. Sean Bean obviously turned in a fantastic performance.
Sean Bean,
Yeah.
the person who got me in so much trouble when he got cast in Game of Thrones, because I hadn't read the books. I hadn't read the books, but the second I saw Sean Bean was the main character on
Spoilers.
Game of Thrones, I kept spoiler alert. I kept asking,
I think
and I don't know why this is what I got in trouble for. Were spoilers because I kept asking. So is Sean Bean dead yet? Is Sean Bean dead yet? Is Sean Bean dead yet?
Yes, he is.
Because he dies in every movie he's in.
That-
Come
Not every
on,
movie.
people.
Most
Name
movies, so.
one.
he was movie, so that commercial he did when he was 17 doesn't count.
Yeah, the Sharp
No.
series doesn't count.
Sharp doesn't count, but yeah, every movie, and the only one anyone has ever been able to come up with is Ronin, which is another influence on the kind of heisty Shadowrun type games.
Ronin is totally a Shadowrun movie. The Usual Suspects is
Yes.
the one I go back to every time when I'm trying to explain what a Shadowrun is like. I'm like, well, have you seen The Usual Suspects?
But Ronin's the only one anyone's ever been able to come up with, just because he doesn't die on screen. But the whole point in that movie is, again, spoiler alert for a movie that's, 15, 20 years old now, is that his character is a faker who's gotten onto this thing trying to get rich quick, and they find him out and they kick him out of the group. Now, in this group of hardened, toughened badasses, do you really think his body wasn't found with 2 shots to the back of the head a week later?
Well, the thing that, the reason why Ronin resonates very strongly with me is actually in our gaming group back in Maryland, we had a quote from that movie to describe a bad plan. And the quote was, shooters here, shooters here. And if you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. But it was always a great line. If we're like, this plan sucks, we would start saying, so shooters here and shooters here.
All right,
Or what color is the boathouse? That was another good line.
here's one for you. The most influence I've ever had on any Shadowrun game, or the movie that's actually influenced one in progress, and just our Shadowrun game took a hard turn to the left and was never the same again, but we loved it afterwards, was Bad Boys 2.
Huh. Interesting choice.
Well, if you want to talk Pink Mohawk right there.
Yeah.
Pink Mohawk, that's a good way to put it, yeah.
It changed
the big hit.
Yes.
The big hit is that for me, if I want to say like what Pink Mohawk is all about, I would say the big hit. And if you don't know what that is, that's a Mark Wahlberg film that stars Lou Diamond Phillips as the bad guy.
Oh, I remember that now.
It's a great movie.
And it has a really excellent scene, again, that's quoted very often in our Shadowrun games of, well, how are they going to trace the call? Well, no, I have a trace buster. Well, what if they have a trace buster? Yeah, and it kind of escalates from there. But yes, it's a very interesting, worthwhile film if you're curious about that particular style of game. Okay, so Mack, we've talked about fantasy, we've talked about cyberpunk, and we've talked a little bit about sort of the later and earlier epochs of both of those. What about something like sci-fi? If you could think of a game or a movie that's influenced a game for you in the sci-fi genre, what would that be?
Wow. I'm going to try and not say Star Wars. That's the biggest problem.
You could say Star Wars.
I mean, obviously
totally
Star Wars,
Star Wars.
right? It's the hero's journey, which is the basis of every role-playing game.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
it's just Star Wars, right? What do you say? It's Star Wars. But oddly enough, the game...
We're talking about episode 4 here, just to be clear.
4 through 6,
Star
yes.
Wars, the movie called Star Wars.
A New Hope.
A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi... Right.
The Holy Trinity.
Ewoks and Ewoks Battle for Endor.
Okay, fair enough.
Holiday special in there?
I did not see that.
You just cursed this entire podcast, Daryl.
I had to do it.
I didn't.
It's not. It doesn't count because it's not film.
You know who gave me? I had never seen it, and Jay Little gave me a copy of that, and I'll never forgive him.
It is soul destroying.
No, but when I don't look at, except for Star Wars, like I've never tried to run a Star Trek style game, anything like that. The only media that wasn't a tabletop game that influenced my tabletop games was a video game. The Mass Effect trilogy really influenced the way I run sci-fi now.
Okay, interesting. Now, Mass Effect is a very strong influence, I think, in general in terms of storytelling and meaningful choices and things like that. So I can definitely see how that can impact the game. Unfortunately, it's not really a film, so I mean,
it doesn't really count.
Fit our, yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't really count. But no, that's a good point to bring that up because there really should be I think they're working on an anime.
They're working on it. Yeah.
Oh, I can't wait.
Live action.
Ghost in the Shell.
Well, okay, anime is also acceptable, and Ghost in the Shell is totally cyberpunk. It is definitely cyberpunk.
Yeah, if you want to talk about where some of the visuals from The Matrix come from, look at 2 different movies. The follow-up to The Crow that Alex Proyas did, which was called Dark City, which pretty much solidified the aesthetic of the movie to the point where they reused some sets from that movie on the rooftop chase scenes. And the other is Ghost in the Shell. The scene at the end, the battle is very reminiscent of each other in terms of hiding behind columns while automatic fire is going off.
Yeah.
Watch those 2 side by side, and you'll go, "Oh, that's where they got it."
Now I'm gonna caution you a little bit. I'm gonna say that, like visuals wise and feel wise, I think Ghost in the Shell is a very fantastic film. In terms of like an actual storytelling and actual like entertaining experience, I don't think it really succeeds very well. And I think the sequel actually does a little bit better on that. Ghost in the Shell: Innocence.
I don't think we're ever going to talk again.
Okay. Fair enough. And that's the show. Thanks everybody for listening.
I really liked the story of Ghost in the Shell. I mean, it wasn't that deep or that great, but I came off of Ghost in the Shell following up Akira, which is another cyberpunk dystopian thing.
Yeah,
and
Akira...
Trust me, nothing's going to let you down after watching the ending to Akira, where you're just sitting there going, what the fuck?
You make some good points about Akira, but I think, where Ghost in the Shell for me falls down, and again, no hate, just disappointment, in terms of some things. But where for me it falls down is I felt like, and this is partially because I know Masamune Shirow a little bit. I've read almost all of the manga he's ever made. But Masamu Shiro, who's the creator of Ghost in the Shell, he was trying to tell something very high concept. He was trying to bring across some extremely high level concepts to the audience, and it just comes off, in my opinion, it comes off very pretentious and very like, well, let me explain because you're not smart enough to understand, And I just don't think it. I don't think it really
every
worked.
Philip K. Dick adaptation ever.
Wow.
No, well, there's some Philip K. Dick adaptations.
Aside from Blade Runner.
Okay,
Runner
well, Blade Runner is like a
probably-
whole different conversation because I think also Blade Runner is a better style. It's a better it's a better beginner of a style and a better visual, experience than it is like an actual movie.
I'm gonna save you some hate mail though, Ross,
Okay.
by mentioning Ghost in the Shell standalone complex. I
Which
think
is
he
the
beat me
television
to it.
series.
which is the television series, which I think really helped having the long form to not come off pretentious.
Oh no! I totally agree with
Yeah.
you. Standalone Complex is brilliant. I love
Yeah.
Standalone Complex. I think, in terms of like my favorite Ghost in the Shell watching experience, it's absolutely Standalone.
It's the extra 4 hours of time.
Well, yeah. Anyway, so I'm sorry, I kind of got up on my soapbox with Ghost in the Shell, but that's
we
just kind of how I feel.
We came right
We're
back to
talking about movies
cyberpunk.
here. This is
Do we like sci-fi that isn't cyberpunk? Because I just realized I like Star
Star Trek.
Wars, I like Star Trek, and then I like cyberpunk stuff.
Well, we mentioned. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I've got, when you said you've never been able to base a game off of Star Trek, I have in Deep Space Nine.
Ooh, good. Yes.
Because it's a lot more campaign-ish in that it's not hat of the week, planet of the week. You're not, at the end of the show, set a course for such and such, engage. At the end of every episode of every show. No, it is, okay, we've solved this problem and caused 5 more. Shit. And it just keeps snowballing in the whole series. It is really, really great, and it's really great to base a campaign off in another series that's very similar that actually has a role-playing game for it, which is Babylon 5, which I can't admit to having watched it. I tried watching it one time, and the style and the special effects look a little dated from a modern perspective now, but I do really want to give it a proper shot.
Babylon 5 is one of those things that takes a little while to get going, but it's starting season 2 and forward, it's pretty spectacular.
If Sam
But,
Stewart listens to your show and we don't mention Farscape, he'll stab us.
It's true. But again, Farscape is the television series.
It had a 2-hour movie, didn't it?
Well, there's nothing wrong with TV series.
Well, all right. If we want to pick some hairs, split hairs, I should say.
We want to go with
Yeah.
theater movies.
I would prefer. I mean, that's just in terms of like what. In terms of film, I mean that's kind of what I think of when I think of film is a theater movie.
So like Wing Commander and Super Mario Brothers.
Technically, those both count, and actually, Wing Commander. I love the soundtrack to Wing Commander. I'm just gonna say that I do adore the soundtrack.
Every time anyone says Wing Commander, I think of it for about I think of that one. I think they were one of the first ones to use the prototype of the like bullet time effect. I think of that one scene from the trailer, and then I immediately start overlaying it with images from Starship Troopers.
Now that's another interesting film that I do think has some aspects to gaming, certainly. Although it's really funny just to find out. Well, you want to find out, and this is the most entertaining part. You want to find out how many of your friends don't realize it's a satire.
That's a
Just
problem
sometime,
with a lot of
just sometime,
Warhaven movies.
Yeah, just bring up the conversation of Starship Troopers and see
Would you like
how
to know
many
more?
people took that completely seriously.
You know what? I see that on my Facebook all the time. People posting obvious satire, and not to get political, but like.
And wouldn't you know it, the second someone says, I don't want to get political, but things got political. Now, nothing really happened. We just told a couple of jokes and took cheap shots at the first names that popped into our heads. Nothing actually tied into anyone. We were discussing Poe's Law, which is the internet law that it is impossible to create a work that is so obviously over the top that it cannot be taken for a real extremist's point of view. That's what we were talking about in relation to Starship Troopers, and we went a little overboard on some of the references, so I've cut this part out. At this point in time, Mack actually had to leave us to do some prior commitments, so I'm going to cut back in here with Mack telling us goodbye.
Unfortunately, Mack Martin has got to leave the tavern to go take care of some business, in some gaming business, which is always something we like to promote here on the show. So thank you for coming to the tavern, Mack. We really appreciate your time. It's been a real pleasure having you on.
Oh, it was a blast. I hope I can do it again.
We'd love to have you back. But first, why don't you talk to our listeners a little bit about what you're involved in right now and where they can find you, just so they know what to look for.
Well, we're on weird-games.net doing all the Malifaux fun stuff. Malifaux 2nd Edition is currently having a beta for all of the Wave 2 stuff, which is going on, and we're trying to get all that nice and balanced. We've decided to make less money and make the game better instead. I know that sounds crazy. We'll make more money in the long term, I'll admit it, right? Better games last longer.
Of course.
That's why we're all here, is for better games.
Right. But I have just, as of today, written the last bit that I needed to write for Fate Master's Almanac for Through the Breach. Through the Breach is in its last legs of testing. It's about, go to the last edits and be off to print and ready for our Kickstarter backers to get it as soon as we can make that happen. And
as a fellow developer and writer for that product, I do want to say it is an excellent thing and people should go check it out.
I'm really excited to see it hit the shelves, and frankly, I'm really excited to get to move on to the next books, and it's just going to be fantastic.
All right, well, we appreciate having you come on to the Gamers Tavern with us, and we will catch up with you again in the future.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a shame we have to say goodbye to Mack, but I'm going to go ahead and grab around while we get our next guest, Alan Cerny, a.k.a. Nordling from Anacle News, who is technically my boss. We're going to get him settled in at the table in the corner, and we'll be right back after this word from our sponsor. Hello, gamers. I'm Daryl Mott Jr. from Anacle News Tabletop and the Gamers Tavern Podcast, which you probably know because I'm betting I was just talking a second ago. I'm sure you already know about DriveThruRPG, as it is the biggest repository for digital copies of your favorite games. Dungeons & Dragons, Shadowrun, Battletech, World of Darkness, Numenera, Fate, and so many more. And sometimes there are pennies on the dollar because, face it, PDFs can sometimes be so much more convenient than print copies, but if you need print copies, they sell those too. So if you want to support the Gamers Tavern podcast, click on the affiliate links in the show notes and check out DriveThruRPG.
All right, and we're back. Thank you very much for listening to the Gamers Tavern, episode 10. And I get to do the introduction today because my boss is on the podcast now. Alan Cerny from Anacle News, a.k.a. Nordling. Would you like to say hi to everyone?
How everybody doing tonight?
Hello, Alan.
Very well.
And welcome to the show. I'm a big fan of your work on Anacle News. I read it quite a bit.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
And it's appropriate we finally get him on the show on the episode we're talking about gaming and movies. And I believe Ross was just about to bring up one of my favorite action movies of all time. That's going to lead to a great segue for Alan to probably talk our ears off.
Okay.
But, go ahead and...
I can talk your ear off
about
about
you about
movies.
to bring up?
Well, the film I was talking about is, and we started this conversation earlier with our previous guest, Mack Martin, and we were talking about how films have influenced gaming. And we had gone through a lot of different genres, but the genre I was just thinking about was like the action genre. And the one standout film for me that influenced me as a gamer and influenced the types of games that I've both participated in and created myself is Die Hard.
Oh, yeah.
There's just something about Die Hard, the set piece, the particular tone, the particular story twists that I think is just absolutely perfect for modern games, action games of all kinds. You can even basically just take that whole concept, lift it up, and put it down in a whole new genre. You could say, we're going to do Die Hard in fantasy, or we're going to do Die Hard on a spaceship, and you totally can.
Well, how many
and that just
pitches
instantly
from the 80s came up, which was Die Hard in a
sure. But
speed,
I'm
Die
saying
Hard on a bus.
with gaming though specifically, it brings up a bunch of different ways for characters to get involved. They already know those points where they can link up with the ongoing narrative.
Well, Die
Anyway,
Hard
go
is
ahead.
so meticulously plotted out and so meticulously planned. I mean, from level to level and floor to floor, it would actually make a really great game, a role-playing game. If somebody wanted to design Nakatomi Plaza, that would be great. I mean, you could totally
I've never
pull
really
that
thought
off.
of Die Hard as a dungeon crawl.
Pretty much, it pretty much is, exactly. I mean, you go from floor to floor, it gets harder the higher you go up, and eventually you've got to fight Carl.
Ho ho ho! Now I have a magic wand.
Exactly. Now that would be a really cool module. I would love to play basically Die Hard in a castle where terrorists come and take over the king and queen. They've got them locked away, and you're without any weapons
Ross,
except for maybe a dagger, and you don't even have any shoes on, and you've got to go.
Okay, Ross, we're gonna have to cut this bit so you and I can get started on this after the podcast.
Yeah. Well, for real, I have a quick story I want to tell. I was actually playing in a D&D game that my friend Stephen Furlani was running, and he started out by saying, "Okay, you're all playing characters who are members of the Duchess's court," and we're like, "Okay," and he started us out, sort of dealing with some minor issues in the Duchess's lands, and we're like, "Okay, this is we got lulled into a sense of security that this is what the game was going to be about," and then he had this. This event occur that drew us away from the home castle. And we went out and dealt with that, and on the way back, we found that, one of our ancient enemies had come in, had taken over our castle, stocked it with his bad guys, and basically we couldn't get in. And we were like, oh my god, okay, this is bad. This is really, really bad. We need to plan and find our way to get back inside, because he's now taken over, he's now ruling, the kingdom, right? That's basically what we thought. So we must have spent maybe 2 hours, maybe 3 hours planning on how we were going to get back into our own castle and kick this guy out. And the best part was this twist, because we do that. We go back in the castle, and Steve's just like, "Yep, there's no guards. Yep, yeah, no problem. You get right in." We're like, "What happened? Where is everybody?" We get into the central core of the castle, and all we find is, guess what? A big empty vault. They die-harded us. And I was like, oh my god, I totally lost my shit there for a while. And I told Steven how impressed I was, because I had never seen anybody pull this off in a role-playing game before, but it was just an amazing twist. He played with our expectations, he played with our sort of understanding of how the genre is supposed to work, because we all assumed the bad guy was taking over the Duchess's castle to try and rule her lands. He didn't want to rule her lands. He just wanted what was in her vault. And we're like, oh man, what a brilliant move. But it was all inspired by, I would say, copied from almost, but that doesn't give Steven enough credit, from Die Hard.
Very cool. Well, I would love to see it. I mean, if you're going to play a Die Hard-esque kind of dungeon crawl, I mean, for one thing, I would love to see somebody, there's somebody's got a magical suit of armor and they're ready to put it on and it doesn't fit. It's like totally doesn't fit. Or, they're just the
smallest guards I've ever seen in the castle.
Yeah. And, maybe they're all halflings or something. And, all you have is a dagger.
Of course
and barely even that.
Of course they're European. Have you seen this pipeweed?
Come out to the castle. We'll have a few laughs.
That's right. Exactly.
No, for real. It's Die Hard is absolutely one of those that I feel is a very strong influence on games.
And speaking of influences, Die Hard itself had an influence that, like I said, Alan's going to be able to talk for a while about this. If I'm not mistaken, one of the biggest influences on Die Hard was a Japanese director. Is that correct, Alan? At least in tone and style?
No, well, kind of. It was a little about the Hong Kong cinema at the time. Because at the...
Okay, bad segue then. I was wanting to talk about Toshiro Mifune.
Oh, well, no, yeah. No, yeah. Well, if you're thinking of Akira Kurosawa, no. Die Hard doesn't really... I mean, well, I take it back. Akira Kurosawa's films are... The action scenes that he's shot are very orchestrated, and Die Hard is along those lines, where the director McTiernan was, orchestrating his action sequences very much like Akira Kurosawa did, where he would design something where you could tell exactly where everyone was at any given time, and the action geography, the spatial geography of a scene, that was very much out of Kurosawa. But Toshiro Mifune, he's like one of the greats. I'm a huge Seven Samurai fan, and also Yojimbo and Sanjuro, and just a fan of the guy, period. And the work that he did with Kurosawa is amazing. As far as characters, like for gaming, it'd be an interesting thing because if
it weren't for the Kurosawa movies that came out in that time, we wouldn't probably have had as much cultural penetration in terms of the samurai archetype and all those Edo period dramas that he did and action movies.
Yeah.
That really defined a lot of the 80s in terms of they had monk classes from the wuxia
Oriental
films,
Adventures.
Shaw Brothers. And then we had Oriental Adventures, the inappropriately titled.
It's
book,
inappropriately titled, but I love that book.
Legend of the Five Rings
Yes.
wouldn't exist probably without it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have to think of our listeners though as well, Alan. And one thing we ask all of our guests is to tell our listeners a little bit about themselves. So, can you tell the listeners what your gaming character sheet is like? In that, who are you? Where do they know you from? And where can they find you on the internet?
I write for Ain't It Cool News along with Daryl Abstruse. Abstruse does our gaming column, and I write movie reviews and movie news at ain'titcool.com. As far as a character sheet goes, well, actually, my interesting point, my name Nordling on the site comes from my character in the 80s.
Woohoo!
I was just talking about that earlier. I'd never asked you where that name came from.
Yeah, it was. Well, there's a street in Houston called Nordling Street, and the reason it was the character, I just liked the name. I saw the name and said that would be a great name for a D&D character. And my friend lived on the street. We used to play at his house, and so I just, the name stuck. I liked the name. And he was a ranger. He had a magical sword called Blade. Yes, that's entirely, original sounding. I should have just called him Tim or something. But it was a 3-bladed sword made of diamond.
Just like the one from The Sword and the Sorcerer.
Yeah, but it couldn't shoot the blades out or anything. It was just,
okay,
really sharp and really badass. And he would always keep it and then lose it and keep it and lose it. It was like an artifact. And I didn't know what I was doing back then when I was playing. He was a ranger, but he was probably not a very good one. He was more of a fighter guy anyway. But yeah, that's where my name comes from, is the character that I had. And
that's really cool.
Yeah, and
you and Vin Diesel are a lot alike.
Well, I don't. Yeah, I would love to see Vin Diesel's character sheets.
I still want to know if the urban legend about the tattoo is true.
I don't
Apparently
know.
He has his first D&D character's name tattooed on him.
I've heard that from many sources, so I tend to believe it is true.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, I've never heard him admit to it. So
his the films that he chooses. Well, I mean, not so much the Fast and Furious movies, obviously, but the Riddick.
Everyone needs a paycheck.
Well, hey, I love those movies. So but the Riddick films are straight out of D&D.
He's actually gone on record as saying that those are based on him playing D&D for so many years growing up.
Yeah. He has a story of how he played D&D with Judi Dench for the second Riddick movie.
Cool.
Nice.
I can't imagine what that was like. I would with Judi Dench, Oscar-winning Judi Dench, sitting down and playing Dungeons and Dragons with Vin Diesel. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that room. You could make a lot of money if there was
some kind of recording of that out there somewhere.
Yeah, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall for that. That would have been amazing.
No doubt.
Well, it looks like we've officially transferred over into films influenced by games.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we should talk about that now. We should talk about films that have been clearly, built on things that they have learned or even more blatantly created right out of games.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we got to start with the ones that are actually official adaptations. And of course, we're going to start off with there are technically 4 Dungeons & Dragons movies, 3 live action and 1 direct-to-DVD animated of Dragonlance.
Yeah.
Now, I have not seen the 3rd Dungeons & Dragons movie. I did not even know there was a 3rd Dungeons & Dragons movie.
I've only seen the first one, and it was so bad I could not watch anymore.
Well, I'm going to say this. I think the second one...
Jeremy Irons owned that movie.
The second one is
just having so much fun.
I got to say the second Dungeons & Dragons movie is in my opinion, a really good film. I enjoyed the second one quite a bit, and it was very, in my mind, Dungeons and Dragons in terms of the experience that you get when you're watching it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of those 80s swords and sorcery films, pretty much, they felt inspired by Dungeons and Dragons TSR, because I don't think those films kind of, because TSR put out the system, right? They put it out in 79, 80, a little before that, but I mean...
74 was the first
Yeah,
edition.
but it got huge in the 80s.
It got huge in like the 79, 80, 81, and you can sort of see it being reflected in the films of the time. You had Conan the Barbarian came out, and then everybody was ripping off Conan the Barbarian. And Crawl, Sword and Sorcerer, Beastmaster, Dragon Slayer. And Dragon Slayer is probably my favorite.
Oh, God, we didn't even mention...
How did we forget Dragon
how did
Slayer
we miss
earlier?
that one?
Yeah.
For real.
And, all those films, and it's kind of circular. Fans of the games would go and see these movies because they wanted to see, basically, these adventures on the big screen. And eventually it came to Dungeons & Dragons, the movie itself. But, and its influence, Dungeons & Dragons influences all through, a lot of those films. It's even in a movie called, with Timothy Hutton and Tom Cruise, Taps. They talk about D&D in that movie.
Wow, I haven't seen that in a really, really long time.
Yeah, there's a scene in there where Tom Cruise, of all people, it's hilarious, is coming down the stairs and he goes, "Hey, we're gonna play D&D tonight?" Tom Cruise playing D&D.
Wow.
His generation at the time, Vin Diesel, I guess. And they play D&D in E.T., the beginning of E.T. I mean, it's all there. I mean, I think it was hugely influential for a generation of kids, a generation of geeks like us who grew up, play these games, who wanted to see these things on screen. And so, it all comes full circle. I don't think Lord of the Rings films would have been even possible had there not been a built-in audience of sword and sorcery fans and D&D players.
Besides, come on. Watching that movie, Legolas was a min-maxed 4E character playing in a first edition game. Come on, that was...
Lord of the Rings is absolutely...
Seriously.
There's a lot of things in Lord of the Rings that's a cycle too, because Lord of the Rings influenced D&D, which then, they kind of feed off each other.
Yeah. I remember a few years back, and y'all probably can corroborate this better than I can, but I remember reading a Dragon magazine where Gary Gygax basically trashed Lord of the Rings. Y'all might be able to look this up online or something, but he trashed it. He said, well, it wasn't really original. The stuff that we're doing with TSR is more original than Tolkien's work, and the ring is just a magical ring with a really bad curse on it, invisibility ring, and he kind of broke down the series, and I really that was one of my things that really irritated me, because it all comes back to Tolkien really, but
he was the archetype, he was the genre starter for what we traditionally consider fantasy now.
Yeah. It all goes, there's, before Tolkien, you had Robert E. Howard, you had Lord Dunsany, you've had Lovecraft, you had a lot of different authors, Michael Moorcock. They were all, well, Michael Moorcock is after Tolkien, but they're all influenced, and they were, they created their worlds together, and D&D really wasn't even a part of their, it wasn't even on their landscape. So, it all comes around, it's just fascinating to me. It all comes around.
All right, so when we're talking about, games that have become movies, this is also true not just for Dungeons & Dragons, but Clue.
Yeah.
For example.
Clue's a great movie.
Well, we all agree on that. I think all the performances in Clue were fantastic. Martin Mull probably turned in his best ever.
Much.
What?
It is so awesome. I love that movie so much.
Clue is just great.
There's
nobody here. Nobody. Nobody here.
Nobody. It's just, the dialogue is just snap, snap, snap.
It's great.
Oh, it is just brilliantly written, brilliantly performed. The style is gorgeous. The way it's shot is perfect.
Yeah.
And
it brings you to mind of the game. It doesn't feel like they were just making a movie and slapping a title on it. It is the game.
Speaking of Clue, I was in the store yesterday, and I saw, they have all these different editions of these games now. Like Monopoly has, Nintendo editions or, Adventure Time editions. Well, I saw a Clue edition of Dungeons and Dragons. I didn't know that was out.
Yep.
Huh.
That came out, I think, last year, maybe the year before.
I'd be real curious to play that. That'd be a lot of fun. Well, I
there's
killed
also-
The one I'm wanting to play is the Sherlock themed one, but apparently it's only available in England.
So we've talked about a movie that was a big success, that really worked really well. Everything was great. I think we all agree.
Well, actually,
Clue was a major accomplishment in terms of film.
Uh-huh.
But it was based on a game. Well, there's another film, more recent, that was very similarly based on a game, a popular game, Battleship.
And that's an awful movie. Well, you know why
Yeah,
it's so
maybe
awful?
not so much a success.
Well, you know why it's so awful? I'll tell you exactly why it's so awful.
Because it doesn't bring you the game?
They veered away from what the game is about. The game is basically, there's an episode of Star Trek. Gosh, I can't remember the name of it. It's called something of Terror, Balance of Terror. I can't remember what. Basically, it's a hide and seek kind of game with the Enterprise and a Romulan ship, and they're basically trying to maybe it's Balance of Power. I can't remember. I'm gonna get trashed for this for not knowing the title.
But it was like a World War II submarine battle.
Exactly. And they could have totally made...
That was Wrath of Khan, too.
Yeah, exactly. Wrath of Khan has that. They could have totally made a Battleship game that was, realistic in the terms of building tension and not... They didn't need all the stuff that they had. I mean, and how can you have a movie called Battleship with Liam Neeson in it where Liam Neeson never once says, you sank my battleship?
That's
a crime against cinema, okay?
Well, let's talk about maybe one that did work a little bit better, and in my mind was actually a really big surprise in how well it worked. Real Steel.
Real Steel, is that based on a game?
Yeah. I mean,
it's
very obviously based
Rock'em
on
Sock'em Robots. Yeah,
Rock'em Sock'em Robot. Yeah.
Yeah,
in my mind, it's obvious. I'm sorry. I apologize for maybe it isn't to most people, but to me, I was just like, oh, that's clearly Rock'em.
Well, it's actually based on a short story by Richard Matheson.
Right.
But
now actually I haven't actually seen it, and I actually had it in the notes as that Hugh Jackman robot movie.
Yeah.
And I had to Google the name because I couldn't remember it. Now that I know Richard Matheson wrote it, I got to see this movie now.
Oh, it's really good. But you know what? They should have. I don't know why they didn't get the marketing team and just call it Rock'em Sock'em Robots. A, I think it would have made more money in the theater, and B, it's exactly what it is.
That's what it is. Yeah. Even let's put it this way: even if it isn't the official Rock'em Sock'em Robots movie, in my mind, it succeeded at everything that you would want that movie to succeed at anyway.
Exactly.
And actually, the thing about I went to Real Steel thinking kind of like, I was like, oh, this is gonna be like Battleship. It's gonna be a real big disappointment. I just wasn't. I didn't have high expectations.
Right.
But I watched it and I was like, wow, this, to me, this feels like someone who has played and enjoyed that game. Took everything that they, imagined in their head was happening and turned that into a really great story with some great acting and some good, twists.
Yeah,
I thought it was
it's
really
quite
fun.
a good movie. It's surprisingly good, considering I don't really care for that director's work normally. But Real Steel's a lot of fun, and it's got really good characters, and it's got really great emotional high points in it. It's really good.
Yeah. So let me ask. Sorry.
Well, I had
Go ahead.
one official adaptation that I wanted to ask you two about because you two are closer in generation than I am. You're a little bit older than I am. I was really young when this show was on, but when you guys were talking about the 80s and Dungeons and Dragons, first thing that always pops into my mind is the cartoon.
Oh yeah,
the Saturday morning cartoon. With
Look, it's a Dungeons and Dragons ride.
I love that cartoon. Looking back on
too.
it now, it's pretty bad, but at the time I really dug it.
I agree that most of it's bad, but there's like one or two episodes that still are really, really good. Remember the episode where they all decide to kill Venger?
Yeah.
That still holds up today. That's like a solid, like, emotional, like, wow, these are kids talking about straight up murdering a dude.
Well,
and they go through the whole thing.
I got a little irritated with the show when they would have these great D&D characters like Lolth, and they had Tiamat, and they were just
Tiamat,
monsters.
Yeah.
And in the game, they're not.
Yeah.
They're actual characters. Tiamat's a very intelligent.
They're the puppet masters that are scheming and plotting everything.
Yeah,
in the world, God level.
But it did have Venger, who was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And Uni.
Well, Uni's not so much awesome. Venger is a serious bad guy. I mean, I was always like, yeah, dude, you do not want to mess with Venger.
One of the things I remember from the TV show, because with the cartoon where they were having the characters like Cavalier, Barbarian, and Acrobat. And
Magician,
I'm going,
Thief.
hey, those characters haven't... And I think like Unearthed Arcana like came out like a year before.
It was the newest thing right then. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like this is really clever kind of marketing here, because I mean it's.
I don't remember the Acrobat. I'm gonna have to buy that book.
Yeah,
now.
exactly. And the thing about see, and it's still prevalent in gaming today because there's so many books for so many things because they just want you to keep buying books and books and books. But I just remember that the time when they were putting all this stuff in the cartoon, it's like, well, they're probably gonna have a book for that,
No, but the cartoon was.
We never did get
amazing.
a cartoon campaign book. I'm surprised considering all the campaign things that were coming out around that time.
Yeah,
I'm
surprised.
Licensing is a funny world, especially back in the 80s. I imagine who knows? It should have had a book, certainly. But on the same token, there's a cartoon we talked about earlier in the show, the BattleTech cartoon, which did have an official source book for BattleTech.
Cool. One of my favorite games, I think now the gaming that I'm kind of orientating myself towards is kind of superhero role-playing gaming, because I just love the stories that come out of them. My friend Jeremy, who runs 8th Dimension Comics and Games here in town, he was a big fan of Champions.
Yes!
And
you just mentioned one of my favorite games of all time.
Yeah, and
the only thing you could have made Ross happier is if you'd mentioned Robotech.
well, I mean, Champions is still the definitive superhero role-playing game system, I think. It wasn't too complicated, but it grew with the rules, and basically they had a power for everything. You could come up with everything. And the stories my friend Jeremy was telling of the game they had. Okay, let me kind of clue you in on one of the characters they had. One of the characters that they created was, by day, he's the Lincoln Memorial. But by night,
Wow.
the Lincoln Memorial puts a mask on, and he's called Democrobot.
Wow.
And it's
I
like,
want to be in this campaign right
That's
now. Right
brilliant. And the stories that he was telling,
Can I
one of
join
the
by Skype?
characters had a wife who didn't know about his secret identity, but then one night they got mugged, and he fought them off. And so his wife tells him, you should be a superhero. So his wife makes him another superhero outfit.
Oh, no!
So he's two superheroes.
Wow.
And one of them his wife doesn't know about. And
Wow.
the story was... the stories that you could create are just so wonderful. And one of the things that I've always loved about role-playing games, and I'm getting away from the topic a little bit, but it's coming back to it, is that you could... I mean, and Jim Butcher does it. A lot of authors do it, where they basically write books and movies based on the gaming that they played. And I guess it's coming back to what we were talking about with Vin Diesel.
Well, that's where...
And by the way, that superhero game he's talking about, that's 8th Dimension Comics in Houston, Texas.
Houston is a hotbed of good Champions games. My friends Justin Dunnick and Theron Bretz both live there and are excellent Champions gamers. I wonder if you know them, Alan.
I probably
okay
don't. I haven't played Champions in a really long time. I don't even have the book anymore, but I don't know what happened to it. I'd love to be able to pick it up again. It's a matter of time more than anything. I don't get to play nearly as much as I'd like.
So you were just saying, people to take their games and turn them into the film that they make.
Sure,
but that's not, and that's not just true with like films either. Like Game of Thrones is a really, George R.R. Martin is a gamer.
Yeah,
and
you could
Wild
tell
Cards.
those
There's actually
stories.
a theory going around.
Wild Cards came right out of their Superworld.
Yeah, and you could tell the stories that he's telling. It's funny because, you get all these people who are upset, these different plot twists and turns and characters dying in Game of Thrones. And at the same time, people who play games look at it and go, well, yeah, but that happens all the time in games. It's almost like...
There's a theory going around that George R.R. Martin played in the first edition campaign with a killer DM, and he went and said to the DM, I'm going to write an epic fantasy series when I grow up, and you're going to regret, I'm going to make you love these characters, I'm going to kill them all off.
Well, to get back to film, though, there's a couple of things. I think probably one of the first ones we should probably talk about is actually in the realm of anime.
Uh-huh.
The Record of Lotus War is very obviously some guy's DVD.
Yeah, it's been I haven't seen it in a long time, and I don't remember finishing the show, but I loved that show.
Mid-90s, I think.
Me too. It's just adorable. Record of Lotus War is just adorable. Every little piece of it. And one of the best parts is it showcases a character who's the best example I've ever seen of a true neutral alignment. who strives to maintain balance above all. To the point where she's the main bad guy actually for the game, for the series. And you can just kind of pick out, like, okay, that guy's a fighter, that guy's a fighter thief, that guy's a mage. You can easily just pick out who's, and the tactics that they use and the spells. It's just like a treasure trove if you're a gamer to watch Record of Lodoss War.
Right.
And pick out all the little pieces that are part of that.
Yeah.
And if you're a longtime gamer, there's a series that I loved. It was the series that got me into anime whenever I went through that phase. I'm not saying I dislike anime now. It's now just become another medium for me. It's some of it's good, some of it's bad. I'll watch it or not. But the one that got me into it was called Slayers, which was an anime series that it wasn't based on, but it was inspired by the creators playing in games where the joke isn't nearly as, and this is something I didn't even realize until probably a few years ago, and I watched this when I was a teenager. But a few years ago, I realized that there's a meta joke throughout the entire first season of Slayers where if you watch the characters and how they act, it's not a parody of characters in fantasy. It's a parody of gamers playing characters. Lena Inverse is the complete and utter munchkin. She cheats at everything she does and does everything she can to get all the treasure.
Right.
Gory is completely min-maxed to the point where his intelligence is so bad that he's compared to a mushroom multiple times.
True.
Zelgadis, his character, is the emo guy who writes a 15-page backstory for his character that's completely tragic and emo and dark.
To be fair, he does have a really cool backstory.
And it's really good writing too. That's why it took me so long to even realize this meta joke was existing.
Yeah.
And all the main characters on the show have that same sort of, when you watch the show and it's really, really cool. And then you watch again and you watch for that, you can start seeing, okay, that's that guy. That's that guy playing that character. That's that guy playing that character. And you can see the behind the scenes meta thing going on. It's really, really cool.
Well, we've got Nordling on the show, and it's wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for showing up.
No problem.
To being on Gamers Tavern. We've got you on the show. It would be a shame not to ask you, like, directly, like, what is the first film that comes to your mind when we say pick out a film that is obviously based on gaming or someone's campaign?
Gee, Krull feels like it's very much based on somebody's role-playing. And
we talked about that in the first half. That was the very first movie I brought up as being like, this is what I think D&D should be like.
Well, interesting story. Krull was originally going to be the Dungeons and Dragons movie, but they couldn't square the rights away.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
They couldn't square the rights away, and so they basically created this whole new world and these new creatures and everything. But it was supposed to be the first D&D game, and first D&D movie, and just didn't pan out. I don't know how much of Krull was, played as opposed to being just written. Because it's the same kind of, Joseph Campbell archetypes, the hero with 1,000 faces sort of thing, kind of movie anyway. Very Star Warsy in that way. But Krull feels like something that could have been played out. Dragon Slayer feels like one of those too. And that's still the best dragon on film, period. I don't know how Smaug is going to be in Desolation Smaug, but if it can be anything coming close to Vermithrax pejorative in Dragon Slayer, I don't know.
Yeah, Vermithrax is, I would say, the standard.
Yeah, not just the standard, just the pinnacle, really, because that's just a beautiful created creature.
Yeah.
And the way it's designed, like when she's walking on her wings, and I remember the first time I saw it, I thought that they would like strapped wings on a lizard because it looked surreal to me. But actually, that was all stop animation. It was just a new way of doing stop animation that looked extremely realistic.
The thing that struck me about Vermithrax that was so impressive to me was how invulnerable the creature was. Faith did nothing to stop the creature. Blades and swords and arrows, none of that worked. And even when they went out of their way to forge like the ultimate, dragon slaying weapon, that spear that could cut right through an anvil, even that couldn't kill it. It required destroying all the magic in the world.
Basically a suicide
to kill
bomber.
Vermithrax.
Basically, he was a suicide bomber. He was
whoa! To me that was like, there is no better way to communicate to my mind at that age just the sheer power and majesty of a dragon by showing the great lengths you have to go to defeat.
Yeah, you start taking dragons kind of for granted the more you play D&D, and then they end up showing up in everything, and then you take them for granted. They're supposed to be these very rare, powerful creatures that if you'll be lucky if you live a lifetime, no matter what kind of character you are, and see one, much less fight one. And that's always how I'd like to treat them in my campaigns. Is like, if they're in the title, and you should respect is due. They're just not a routine monster.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit because
there's one thing I
go
wanted to
ahead.
go back to. Alan was talking about the stop motion animation. There's something that is horribly wrong that we didn't bring up in the first part of it when we're talking about films that influenced gaming. And when you mention influencing gaming and stop motion, there's one name that comes to your mind:
Clash of the Titans.
Ray Harryhausen.
Ray Harryhausen. Yeah, absolutely.
You got it.
Clash of the Titans.
The original
Sinbad.
Clash of the Titans.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I love Ray Harryhausen. I think Clash of the Titans is probably the one I don't want to call it my favorite, but that's definitely the one that kind of really exposed me to him because I was only 11 at the time when it came out. But the Sinbad movies are amazing. The monsters are just beautiful and so well done. I could totally see how his films would influence gaming because every creature that's in a Ray Harryhausen movie is probably in a monster manual somewhere.
Well, let's
Yes.
shift gears for a minute because I think we talked an awful lot about fantasy and fantasy films and so forth. Let's shift gears a little bit because in the 90s, the big gaming revolution was the White Wolf games. It was vampire, werewolf, those kind of things. And I would say there's a film that came out not so long ago. I won't say recently, but not so long ago that was definitely that kind of on film for me, which was Underworld.
Yeah.
That's 2000, 2001, I think.
So 12 years
It
ago.
was just after Matrix.
Yeah, and those are the World of Darkness games kind of influenced a lot. I would say Jim Butcher's universe that he created is a little influence from that.
Oh God, yes.
Those games, I was never the big fan of them, and I'll tell you why. I have no problem with role playing in your games, but I'm not a big LARP fan, and those kind of steered toward LARPing, and
They did.
I'd
true.
rather sit and play and play with the dice and have the characters do things, but because that's definitely a game that's more geared toward the role playing aspects than like combat or anything like that.
It's a shame that Mack left because he has some awesome LARP stories to tell.
I've already told my one
That's
good
true.
one. So,
But the thing about Underworld that I wanted to bring up is actually it was a film that was sued for copyright infringement.
White Wolf and Nancy Collins
Right.
both sued
So
collectively.
So it's fair to say this movie was so similar that it was actually brought up in litigation. And to be fair, I mean I'm not going to say who's right or wrong, but I could definitely see in my head I would be like, oh yeah, I can understand why someone would think that they needed to sue over that film.
Yeah, well, I mean,
I could go into detail on that, but that would require a primer on copyright law. So
that whole World of Darkness thing is kind of a victim of its own success because if you want to draw a straight line, it's not very far from World of Darkness to Twilight. I mean, and then the kind of
Ooh.
no, it's true. It's
You
true.
just
It's true.
Send your emails to nordling at
No, I'm serious. It's true because it's just the stories that they were telling.
don't blame White Wolf for Twilight.
I mean, it's the stories that they were telling changed people's perceptions of what these characters are like. Vampires. Back in the day of Murnau's film Nosferatu, they were monsters, and then the romance was brought into it with Bela Lugosi.
Well, that actually
And then it all comes full circle.
ended up getting adapted with Anne Rice, and then the film that I was talking about earlier is The Hunger.
Yeah, that's a good
in terms
vampire
of
movie
really
too.
romanticizing the vampire.
No, The Hunger's an amazing movie. Tony Scott.
And if you want to go with werewolves, American Werewolf in London.
Yeah, American Werewolf in London
The
is
Howling.
good. There's a new horror film coming out next year called Afflicted, which is basically vampires, but it's done in such a great original new way. It reminded me of Let the Right One In, where it really kind of turns the whole vampire myth around. And it's a found footage movie, but it's really, really well done. And the vampire is one of those archetype characters that could be basically made to fit anything.
Every culture has something that's vampire related. Every single culture on this planet has some form of vampire. In China, they hop.
Yeah,
they can't walk. They only hop.
Sticky rice scares them away, and but yeah, it's interesting. I tend to not like vampire films anymore. They have to really bring something different to the whole deal, because so many people have been the tragic love vampire thing. I'm just kind of done with that.
Well, there's a vampire film that I would like to talk about that when I was playing the White Wolf games back in the day, this is one of my favorites to show people. It was Near Dark.
Near Dark.
Which stars Bill Paxton.
Oh, yeah.
Stars Bill Paxton and Lance Henriksen. And I thought it was a pretty interesting look at vampires. One of my favorite lines, I can actually... a sign of it being a good movie is I can remember actual dialogue. And there's a scene where they ask Lance Henriksen's character, they say, well, just how old are you? And he says, let me put it this way. I fought for the South.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's a great line.
Yeah.
And Lance Henriksen delivers it. He makes you believe it.
The cool thing about those vampires is that he wasn't even the oldest one. The kid was the oldest one.
Yeah.
He was the one who brought them in.
Speaking of lines, there's one line I remember from a vampire movie that was better than it should have been considering the production problems it had. That was John Carpenter's Vampires.
Oh my gosh.
That movie is really good, but the book is
amazing. Fun. The book is a lot of fun.
If the studio hadn't hamstrung Carpenter at the last minute with the budget, that movie would have been amazing. But there was one line in the book that's always stuck with me. They were just trying to fight Master Vampire at Dark, was the new vampire hunters, and one of the more experienced one grabs him and shows, what were you thinking? Do you have any idea how fast a Master Vampire can move at dark? And he goes, no. Says, of course no one does. There's too many fucking oceans in the way.
Wow. There's one from 1992 called Innocent Blood.
That's a great movie. John Landis made
too.
that.
Robert Loggia is in it, and it's for me that one in Near Dark were like, if I had to go tell people like this is what vampire gaming would be like, I would show you those two.
Well, my personal favorite vampire,
because the vampire character in that is completely.
My personal favorite vampire movie is Let the Right One In, which is amazing.
It's a great vampire movie, but I meant in terms of like the game vampire.
Oh yeah,
definitely. The experience of that, but yeah. Let the Right One In is a brilliant vampire movie. I do agree.
Well, when you see Afflicted next year, you'll probably dig that because it basically puts you in behind the eyes of a vampire, really, and it's really, really well done. It's really cool. I think a lot of people are going to dig it, especially fans of World of Darkness.
Well, I think we've talked about a bunch of different types of genres. What if we talk about this, Alan? Can you think of a movie you've seen? And there's been several, so I'm hoping you've seen at least one. A movie actually about gaming.
Yeah, there's Zero Charisma.
Why don't you talk
Zero
about
Charisma is amazing. Zero Charisma is an Austin shot film. Played at South by Southwest this year. And it's basically about the most unlikable dungeon master ever.
That's a bold claim.
No, he's an asshole, and
he's not that bad. He's not that bad. Trust me.
he has
comparatively speaking,
he has his own problems. But Zero Charisma is about this guy who he lives for the game. Okay, he's created his own gaming system. He has friends over, and then one day, one of the people in his game, he's having problems with his marriage, so he has to leave. So they're looking for a new gamer. And basically, they find this guy named Miles, who's basically a hipster. He's a casual geek. For Scott, the main character played by Sam Eatson, this is his life. And we all know people like him, okay, who probably cannot.
There might be people like him on this podcast right now.
So sorry, I had something stuck in my throat.
Well, I mean,
no, I've never had the problem of having a hipster in my game and having to.
Well, I mean, it's not.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's
Alan.
not just that. It's he doesn't have very good social skills. He can't interact with people very well, and so he lives in the game because that's really his only outlet. And then this guy comes in and kind of ruins everything in a way, and he doesn't know how to react. He doesn't have the social skills to be able to adjust, and so he basically rages. It's a comedy, but it's really, I mean, any geek who sees the movie is going to recognize somebody or themselves in the movie. There's just no way getting around it.
and it is an amazing, amazing, amazing film. But if you are part of the gaming culture, a lot of the scenes are going to be kind of uncomfortable because they're going to hit really close to home, either for yourself or for someone you may know that's a friend of yours that acted this way, that's close to you. It is a film that I recommend everyone watch. I am not sure if I'm going to, as much as I want to, I don't know if I'll be able to watch it again because it captures gaming so well that a lot of it hits way too close to home, and it kind of makes me uncomfortable.
It doesn't sound to me like it's a love letter to gaming, which unfortunately, like, that's the kind of film I tend to prefer when it's about gaming, is the ones that are...
It's not
the things that are good about it.
It's okay. I wouldn't call it a love letter, but it doesn't make fun of gamers. Okay, it's not at their expense.
Okay.
I think that RPGs, role-playing gaming, and people who are fans, I mean, look, let's all be honest. We're all introverts. Okay, it's geared to.
How dare you, sir? No, for real. You're right.
We're all introverts. This is our way of escape. This is our way. I always used to call RPG nerd poker. Because it's what it is. We all get together, play games, and.
Which is actually the name of Brian Posehn's podcast, where he does live play D&D.
He calls it that? Okay, I didn't know that. But we're all introverts. We all have, I kind of grew out of it because I think I'm more sociable now. But back in the day, I wasn't, and it was a way for me to socially interact with my friends and have fun. And I don't think the movie makes fun of that. I think that and the filmmakers realize that this is something that some people need, and this is their life, and it doesn't judge them. Now, the main character, Scott, he has issues, he has problems, as does everybody. And I think in that we recognize Scott, we recognize the things in Scott and us because we all have problems too. People who are tending to be attracted to games, like to the degree that Scott is. It's because that they have problems that they're trying to get away from. That's not to say the gaming is bad. Gaming is something that is a distraction from the issues that they need to address. But it is true that when we want to play, it's because it is for an escape. We are trying to get away from the drudgery of regular life and enjoy ourselves. And there's nothing wrong with that.
And I would say it kind of is a love letter to gaming in a way. If you ignore the main character and look at everyone else that's playing in the game, they're doing it for exactly the reasons. They're all really cool people, and these are the sort of people I would love to have at my table because they all seem like really well. And so there is no hate toward gaming. It's the character and how he reacts to challenges that come up in front of him. That is where the uncomfortable comes.
Scott's pretty stunted as a person, but all his other friends around him they love gaming. And they use it because, like, there's two other characters who play in this game who make videos, short videos, and post them online of little, short films that they make, action movies. There's another one who's married. The main character, or the character of Miles, who's the hipster kind of guy. He's actually he's not that bad a guy. It's just that. Well, Scott and him just don't get along at all.
Yeah.
But he has other social outlets, and he uses his geekery, I guess, in different ways. It's just that Scott has invested everything in the game.
It sounds really cool, and I'd want to see it. And I think probably the larger issue for me that I'm excited about is I'm excited about seeing more movies that are based on games. That gaming is coming out of just being like a little cameo appearance, like we talked about in E.T. and Taps. There's actually now whole movies being made specifically. That's the backdrop is the game. Is gaming in general.
It's funny. I mean, I don't really write like fiction or stuff. I do sometimes. I still have some stuff, but one of the ideas I was shooting around before Zero Charisma is about these 5 group of friends who played games, and then one of them gets married. And one of the things I was going to talk about is that there was going to be a scene in the film where they're all their characters are like basically talking around a campfire, except that they're talking in modern vernacular, and but they're still kind of in character. And one of them is about to get married, and they're worried about how it's going to screw the game up. And but Zero Charisma covered that ground a lot better than I did.
Oh, well, I will definitely put that on my list of things to watch. And just to recap a little bit for the listeners, in the first section we did talk about some other movies that are about gaming. We talked about the Gamers Trilogy. We talked a little bit about the Dungeon Masters documentary, THACO. We talked a little bit about.
Did y'all talk about Darkon?
One other. Darkon, yeah. Talk about Darkon.
Darkon's really good.
I agree.
I'm not I'm not a LARPer, but Darkon's a lot of fun.
It's a good documentary about LARPing.
Yeah.
It made me kind of understand that.
You want to talk about a love letter? Darkon was a love letter to LARPing, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Because it just, aside from after my one bad experience that I've talked about previously on the podcast, I have never had any desire to LARP until I watched Darkon. I'm like, okay,
I want to be part of that.
Really
yeah,
fun.
that was me too. That was my reaction. It was like, dude, if I had been with those guys in my circle of friends, I would probably have been in that because it looked really cool.
Well, did y'all see? There's a comedy out there in 2008 called Role Models with Paul Rudd.
I saw that.
And Sean
one,
William Scott, where Christopher Mintz-Plasse, McLovin from Superbad, he's a LARPer, and they talk about. They end up joining him in his game, and that's a lot of fun. I think that's actually a positive look on gaming.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, Role Models is actually one that looks at LARPing and says, this is the kind of cool. Check
and
it
if
out.
we can ever get the rights squared away, and if Joe Lynch is ever able to get his final cut back,
is this the one with
Knights of Badassdom, which is about?
Yes, I want to see that so.
I saw the trailer. It looks good.
And hopefully that'll all get sorted out, and we'll all get to see Joe Lynch's edit because it got bought. It's all convoluted, but I don't know if we'll ever actually get to see his cut of the film. But I mean, the idea behind it is that these LARPers who end up summoning an actual demon.
Yeah,
and it looks like it's a lot of fun. It looks hopefully again we'll see Joe Lynch's original cut, but we may see more of these kind of films coming down. I just want them to treat this stuff with respect. It's
Agreed.
like a baseball movie or a football movie. They treat football and baseball with respect. Just treat gamers and gaming with respect. That's all I ask. And the whole thing is kind of absurd on the surface because it's a different kind of world that people are used to. But I think that it's just as rich and rewarding for these people as somebody who's a football fanatic and paints their face every Sunday.
That's an excellent point, Alan.
If you break down gaming, if you try to tell people about gaming and they look at you like, "Well, you ain't do that." If you break down any sport, it gets the same way. Okay, this guy throws a ball at me, and then I try to hit it with a stick, and then I run around in a circle, and the more circles I can run, the more points I get. And wait, no, it's actually kind of cool. Come on, come back.
Yeah, the game where you run around in circles, isn't that where you do touchdowns?
Well, everybody's got their everybody's like fantasy football or fantasy baseball. I mean, that's role playing. I mean, you're basically inventing a team.
Have you played Blood Bowl?
What's the old meme?
Dude, totally.
What's the old meme on that one? Fantasy football is role playing for people who used to beat up role playing gamers.
I guess.
In high school.
Well, we're actually coming to the end of our time here in the tavern. So, do you have any final thoughts on gaming and films?
I think you'll see artists and writers who are brought up through the gaming community. It's already very influential in novels, and it's coming through to television and film. Obviously, Game of Thrones is hugely influential. I mean, it has to be from games, and movies like Zero Charisma or Knights of Badassdom or just general fantasy films that are coming down or definitely came from those role-playing sessions of old, I'm sure. It's all a part of it. Storytelling is storytelling.
What about you, Daryl?
If you look up on Wikipedia, I believe, and I'm going to have to put a link in the show notes to this, there is a list of celebrity role-playing gamers. And if you look at that list, it is nothing but a list of some of the top talents in terms of writing, acting, and directing in the industry right now. Stephen Colbert, Matt Groening, Vin Diesel, and that's just off the top of my head. There is a giant list of all these people who have played games.
You don't want to know how much I would pay to play in a game with Stephen Colbert.
Well, he actually went to the Hobbit set. He said he had to be in the Hobbit in some way, shape, or form. So,
Well, he got a walk on.
Yeah, I think so. I think he is one of the people in Lake Town.
He was one of the voice actors for season 1 of Venture Brothers.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, if you want to talk about someone who doesn't look it, but he can school you in Tolkien trivia. He sat there and debated everyone who came on his show from that movie and won every time.
There's a great YouTube of him blowing away James Franco. But yeah, for real, I would love to play a game with Stephen Colbert, and just to see, that guy, doing gamery things. I think it would be great.
I would love to play a game with Patton also.
Yeah. That would be amazing too. Agreed. So, we're actually the tavern's about to close. Last call is being rang out in the Gamers Tavern. Alan, why don't you tell our listeners one more time just where they can find you on the interwebs and what your latest thing is they should be looking for?
I write for AintItCool.com, and what's my latest thing I wrote? Well, I wrote an editorial today about how they should put Burt Reynolds as the bandit in the Fast and Furious movies.
Hell yes, they should. And Jerry Reed. He's dead, though, isn't he?
Who?
Is Jerry Reed alive?
I'm sorry?
Jerry
was
the truck
Reed
driver.
Jerry Reed's gone.
Yeah. Oh, too bad. Yeah, if he was still around, I would say you need to bring him in too.
Yeah.
That's
awesome.
awesome.
I was going to say I would watch the next Fast and Furious movies if Hal Needham directed.
Yeah, he's gone now too, unfortunately. But
yeah.
I mean, those are directly from him. So if Smokey and the Bandit is basically the grandfather of the Fast and Furious movies, so I think it would be a nice way to show respect by putting Burt Reynolds in one of those movies.
Well, isn't there a Granddaddy Fast and Furious that was actually called Fast
Yeah,
and
it was a
Furious?
Roger Corman film, but it really doesn't.
Okay.
It's nothing similar in plot at all, really.
All right. Well,
in terms of tone and style, yeah, Smokey and the Bandit is the prototype for it.
We want to say thank you very much. Daryl and I are both very grateful for having you come on the show and talk to us about films, you being such a film guy. And we want to say thank you for coming on the Gamers Tavern, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
All right. Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
And that almost wraps us up for this week's Gamers Tavern. I'd like to once again thank our guests, Mack Martin and Alan Cerny, for their time and being on the podcast. Before we close up shop here, I know the Queen's Guard's kind of banging at the door right now, but I really want to go through some comments real quick we've gotten through the website and on Facebook. I'm going to start off with one that we got on the website. It's gamerstavern.org. It's from Stephen T. Russell. Stephen says, "Thank you for mentioning Lords of Gossamer and Shadow. Steve Russell, Wright Publishing." Well, for those who don't know, Steve is kind of the guy behind Lords of Gossamer and Shadow, and I really thank him for his comment. Every time I think of Amber Diceless at this point in time, I think of Lords of Gossamer and Shadow, so it got brought up in our podcast back on episode 6, Technology and Gaming, and of course, I had to say something about it. So, thank you for listening, Steve. I hope you stick around. We've also got another comment back on episode 7, which was our Shadowrun episode. Sorry I couldn't come up with a clever subtitle for that one, but oh god, I love Shadowrun so much. But we got a comment from James Myers who said, Wargames West! And James, I completely have to agree with you on that one. Wargames West! Because a lot of my youth was spent thumbing through those catalog pages, and as much as I love the convenience of ordering online and going through all these game stores and through Amazon and all these other places, it just doesn't have the same appeal as looking at those pages and thumbing through the catalog while I've got Green Day blaring through my ears, and yeah, I was in that generation. Anyway, I love Wargames West. I really lament that it's gone now. What are you going to do? You got to deal with what we got now, and we have some great options now for buying games. If you may find some if you check out our sponsors on gamerstavern.org. But I'm going to go ahead and go on to Bill Sorensen, who asks, any chance of getting author Richard Lee Byers on the podcast? He's going to be writing a novella set in the Accursed universe. I can't comment on that at this point in time. We've already recorded the next couple of episodes from the one I'm recording this for to release right now. But I wish Ross were here right now. He'd be able to give you a better answer. It really depends on a lot of factors when we can get guests, because honestly, scheduling guests for this podcast is a lot like herding cats. Freelancers are very, very busy. We're actually going to talk about exactly how busy they can get on a future podcast when we talk about gaming and how to get into the industry. But considering that pretty much every single other person who's worked on Accursed has been on the podcast at this point in time, or will be by the time you hear this, yeah, odds are we're probably going to have him on. I can't give you a guaranteed date. I can't promise you he's going to be on, but we're going to work our best to get him on. Now let's switch over to Facebook, which you can find us on at facebook.com/gamerstavern. This is from Anna Meyer, who said, "Found your podcast recently and have enjoyed a couple of episodes, and it's great. I'm a fantasy map maker, and listening to high-quality podcasts about games and gaming is the perfect inspiration. Thank you for making such a great podcast." Well, Anna, I would like to say thank you very much for your kind words, and thank you very much for doing what you're doing, because I can't draw maps for shit. Here's my method for drawing fantasy maps. I order the greasiest pizza I can find in town. I flip the box upside down. I count to 3. I flip it back and open up. Whatever grease has stuck to the lid, I outline in pen, and then I make a map out of that. That's how crappy my method of making fantasy world maps is. You do not want to know what I do for dungeon maps. But Anna, thank you for listening. And Anna actually had a question later on in the comments thread that we had asking about, are we going to talk about technology and gaming? Well, that was episode 6 of the podcast. So I'm glad we got that instant feedback you wanted and was able to immediately satisfy your needs by providing a podcast that we had already recorded that happened to be the subject you were wondering about. So I really want to thank you for listening, and I want to thank all our listeners. We've got one last comment here. His username is the Grumpy Celt or the Grumpy Celt, depending on how pedantic you are about pronunciations. I'm not getting into that debate. But he says, "Your show is rapidly becoming one of my favorite podcasts. It is always good to hear from Mr. Baker, and a spirited conversation is a good thing." He is obviously talking about our last episode, which we had guest Keith Baker on, who is the designer of Eberron, Gloom, The Doom That Came to Atlantic City, and many other games and products you may have read. I don't want to say we, specifically me and Keith kind of got into it a little bit when it comes to he and I. If you listen to the podcast and listen to what we say, we actually see eye to eye on this issue. We both completely agree, but we got a little bit heated at one point when we're talking about NPCs in gaming, and I'm really of the school you want to make sure they have motivations, and he was talking about unknowable horrors from beyond the stars, and really, if you listen to what we're saying, we're actually agreeing with each other. And Keith's a friend of mine. I've known him for a long time via social media and everything. I haven't met him in person yet, unfortunately. I can't wait to, hopefully soon. But yeah, Keith's an awesome guy. He and I just were kind of playing devil's advocate off of each other on that. There were no hurt feelings. There were no real harsh words exchanged. Yeah, we're cool. So don't worry about that. Yeah. It was a really good discussion, though, and I learned a lot listening to it again, and I hope that you guys learned something, too, in terms of how to create really resonant NPCs for your game and really resonant villains for your game. And that is it for comments for this week. I'd like to thank you once again for listening and thank our guests for appearing. Let's go ahead and get through the legal stuff. This episode of the Gamers Tavern is licensed under a Creative Commons non-commercial, no derivatives license. Please visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/gamerstavern and visit our sponsors at gamerstavern.org. You can also support the show by clicking on the donate button. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, the tavern is closed. Okay, and I may need just a second. My mom is making the pecan pies for tomorrow, and she needs some of my bourbon.
Whoa.
Yum. I want pecan pie. Also bourbon. You know what? I just want the bourbon. Who's got bourbon?
I do.
We are definitely recording this part. Blackmail material.
Cool.
Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Are you ready, Daryl?
I'm ready. But
Okay,
I am not ready. I just realized I'm going to be interrupted in a second.
Okay.
Let me get Mom her bourbon first.
Okay. We are so recording that.
Hey, I would not eat a pecan pie without bourbon. I'm sorry. Okay, guys, my mother has her bourbon now, so
Hooray! So we're ready to start.
we're ready.
Only half an hour later than usual.
Sorry, I had to come home early today because the landlord was coming by with an appraiser, and so I had to come home early to hide the cats in the car. And then my girlfriend was going to drive over to the library and hang out there and read while the cats were in the car with her, and he was here. But he showed up 2 hours early,
Whoops.
so I get here at the same time he does.
Oops.
Now, luckily, he has to do a bunch of stuff outside. We just kind of got the cat squirreled away in a room, and the second he goes around behind the house, we rush out to the car with them. Cat just not happy about it. Throw him in the car, and she jets. But then she gets back around 4:30, and she's like, "Do we have time to go to the store? I have to get this stuff for Thanksgiving, and they're going to close at like 8." And I'm like, "Yeah, let's go." So we go, and literally I get the text from Ross as I'm trying to load my arms with groceries.
All right, so we're going to get our episode started here. I'm going to bring us in. Hello and welcome to episode 10 of The Gamers Tavern. I'm Ross Watson.
And I'm Daryl Mott Jr.
And tonight we have with us Mack Martin, and we're going to be talking tonight about gaming and film. How are you doing, Mack?